Welcome to Sacred Conversations. My name is Mandula. And today I was asked a question. So usually I just say, you can ask a question to people who I'm working with. And then depending on the time frame that I have, I'll be able to answer, because it's not only you who might be curious about this thing or is experiencing the same issue or is just wanting to understand a little bit more from at least my perspective. So if you have any questions, please feel free. It's a sacred conversation. And I want you to just imagine as if we're sitting together in a room and we're conversing and we go and we answer questions and we go a little bit deeper to understanding who we are. What is our makeup? What is all of this? Okay. So if you want to ask a question, like I said, unless it's you need that answer quite quickly, then I would suggest that you book a one-on-one consultation with me. And my email is in the description down below. Okay, so let's continue. I got the question, what is the difference between divine feminine, queen energy, divine feminine energy, queen energy, and empress energy? And at first, when I glanced at that question, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I mean, I don't really know. But like Richard Branson always just said, just always say yes, because there's something for you to learn along the way as well. So what I first got when I picked up this like divine queen empress, already in my mind, there was it's almost like a pyramid / hierarchy. So there's a hierarchy system to this, and not by form of degrading, but by elevation from, if you think of a child crawling, walking, running, okay, and then maybe we'll go back to walking, and then maybe no walking at all. So I want you to see this sort of way in which I'm going to respond through this question as cyclical, and observing the cycles between no walking, crawling, learning how to walk, running, walking, crawling, no walking. Okay, so it's cyclical. So first things first, when I speak about hierarchy, okay, we go back to cycles. I want to just help you understand divine, empress, and queen. I want you to look at it as a tree. Okay, so everything has leaves, at least, at minimum. And then some trees bear fruit, some flowers, some vegetation. So let's just look at this as a tree with just plants. And obviously it has its leaves and then certain plants. You can make the plants according to what you are feeling for. So maybe you think, when you think of divine empress, when you think of queen, maybe it's a rose, maybe it's a sunflower, maybe it's a lily. Whatever it is, think of a flower that you are and a plant. But first, before the flowers bud, it must, have leaves and it must have a trunk, and it must have branches, and it must have a root through the seed. So we look at divine feminine energy as the seed and the root of it all. Then we look at the trunk. The trunk is obviously from the root, so it expresses itself through the divinity of divine feminine energy, and it moves into, we look at empress energy as the trunk. And then we look at the branches as queen. Okay, so let me explain. Okay, empress. And at first, when I looked at this, I was like, I'm not necessarily too well versed in tarot. I don't know how you pronounce it. But this also lines up with that sort of energy, I assume. So we first have to look at divine feminine. Now, when we look at divine feminine, we also look at divine masculine, because it is a form of internal energy and then materialized energy. Okay, so when we look at divine feminine, this is the seed of the feminine. Okay, so it's the energy of the unseen world. It's the ideation phase and space. It's the thinking space of what action to take from this information of any discomfort that comes through the seed starting to create its roots as it moves into the soil, and then it moves out of the soil creating the trunk. So the seed is the most powerful energy. Okay, I'll come back to divine masculine energy just now. But when we are going into the thinking phase, we go into the cleansing and the purifying, because the heart is divinity. Okay, so it's source energy, it's universal, it's God, it's higher power. Okay, so we think of it as that. Then we think of the cleansing and the purifying, which all of this comes from the heart. If you think of the tree of life, we think of as above, so below. Okay. Now, if it feels like you need to take some notebooks. And if you have further questions, we can go on and on about all of these things for lifetimes. And we will, and we have. So when you're cleansing and purifying, it comes through the heart. The heart then feeds information as you breathe in. It pumps in information into the whole body. It's circulated into the brain to action. Because now the brain needs to create an action, but it goes heart, body, brain. And they all have their own brains. The heart has its own brain. The nervous system has its own brain. You know, every single function of your body has its own brain, but they all speak as one. Okay, so divinity, divine feminine. And then as we are cleansing and purifying, you are thinking. So what space are you thinking from? Are you thinking from divine? Are you thinking from a survival mode, or are you thinking from a safety mode? Then as you think, you action something and it comes into physical manifestation, which then enters masculine energy, because the masculine is the physical holding, is more orientated to the physical holding space, and the feminine is the unseen feeling space. So feminine energy is a representation of feeling, energy in motion, emotion. Okay. So it's energy in motion. When you feel, the energy needs to move. How do we move it? Through the thinking first, and then physically it goes into physical manifestation. So it's happening like at every single breath, at every single thought. That's how fast manifestation is happening. Now we look at dark and light. When we look at dark and light, what we are mainly saying is healed and unhealed within your divinity. That's why we speak the healed wounds, we speak the unhealed wounds. So that's the branches, or rather that's the seed of divine feminine. Now, I hope that was sort of like clear as to how to answer that question. So divine feminine is the seed that becomes a root, that becomes the whole trunk and branches and bears fruit, vegetation, flowers, and just leaves. Okay. But I'd like to come to this aspect before we continue to Queen and Empress energy. We have in the divine, the feminine etymology is the wombed man. So when originally the woman, WOMAN, is the wombed man. So it's spelled womb man. Okay. Then the masculine etymology is man. So here we must understand the purpose of the man and the woman. Now I know this conversation is going to you like, where are we going with this? Like, what just happened? I'm just explaining this sort of like energy a little bit more. So, wombed man is a man with a womb. And you can see that, yes, there's been a depiction of a typical woman, that like feminine sort of look, but a wombed man can also look more towards the masculine, depending on the amount of masculine energy or feminine energy she has in her body. Same with the man. A man could look physically strong, but he could have more, oh goodness, excuse me, he could have more feminine energy, okay, within him. And that's why it can get so confusing as to, you can see this man and he looks strong, but he acts more feminine, okay? Because in his energy field, that's what he is consumed more with. And then obviously we look at diet and all those other things, and like different types of DNA and programming and all of that jazz. Now, the wombed man holds deeply the spirit world. Why do we say that? Because it's the unseen. If you look at what happens, okay, obviously, so that's how I say from the feminine, we must also speak about the masculine, because the seed is also part of the masculine. Okay, so obviously the seed enters into the womb. Obviously we have different science now, but I'm talking about the typical route. We go seed into womb, womb into fruition, bearing fruit, right? So masculine represents the physical world, feminine represents the spirit world. Okay, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but I would say non-physical is the feminine in the broader scheme of things. Obviously, we can go into specific things and dissect it really, really deeply, okay? Non-physical is the spirit world and the being, and then the materialized is the doing in the physical world. So it's that which is manifested. Spirit is the ideation phase and in the silence, okay? Now, we look at Empress energy. First, we have to look at what is an Empress. An Empress is either the wife or a widow of an emperor. And these are rulers of an empire. An empire which is multiple kingdoms. Okay. So here when we look at the Empress, we have more leadership qualities, more responsibilities and foresight that this energy exudes, because a trunk has to be stable in order to hold the many branches. Okay. So there is foresight that Empress energy exudes. When we think of a trunk, we think stability. When we think of a trunk, we think center. We think abundance. We think alignment. We think self-control. We think power. We think softness. We think awareness, deep awareness, because to just be a trunk and to not try be anything else other than a trunk takes deep awareness within yourself. Okay, so more leadership qualities that an Empress energy exudes, because this energy has more foresight, is able to see more things in view and has a broader perspective. Okay, then we go into the Queen energy, which a queen is a wife of a king and rules a kingdom. Okay, so we have to understand what is a kingdom first. A kingdom is a country or state or territory ruled by a king or queen. Now, when we look at these word associations, we look at the realm, we look at domain, we look at land, we look at territory, we look at dominion. We also have another part of the definition of kingdom is spiritual reign or authority of God. Okay. So now when we look at the branches, we now go into the queen, okay? Because now the queen is going to be holding the leaves, the vegetation, the fruit. So also has important energy. So here we also look at beauty, right? We look at this like almost like goddess energy, although all of it is like goddess energy because it holds a certain grounding and it holds a certain fluidity from that grounding. So it's almost like these, if you think of science, it's like these atoms that take this very fluid and oil or liquid like state shape. Because when you look at like it's either you look at sensual dancing like a kizomba, you can look at bachata or salsa, you can look at belly dancing, and you can look at just ecstatic dance, or you can just look at any form of energy that's more spirit moved. It's so beautiful and sensual. So when we look at divinity, we look at sensuality, okay? We look at sensual expression because we invite all the sensory experiences as we're interpreting movement. We are visualizing from the ideation phase. How do we take the sound that we are also hearing and connect it to the movement, energy in motion, and allow for the expression of freedom? Okay. So Queen holds that space of beauty, softness, leaves, vegetation, food, nourishment. But remember, it's all coming from the divine feminine, which was rooted from masculine. So the material world cannot live without the physical world. That's why it is important to have those two in union. Okay. So when we look at all of this divine feminine energy, it's higher responsibility and holding space to hold tensions. So every level of the tree is holding different types of tension between comfort and dislike, between the growth and then the contraction. Because once again, you look at the cyclical nature of everything, that as the seed comes in, is like this burst, that big bang, and then it goes and gets planted into the soil. And then it goes and it grows in the dark, but it's growing and it's unseen, but it's felt. And then it grows through the soil. It grows downwards, sideways, upwards, and then on all sides. So you look at a full 360-degree sideways angle. And then it also goes above. That's why I said you got to look at the tree, because exactly what is happening above is happening down below. So anything that is unseen is physically being manifest. So what we don't see are the fruits that we bear. The work through the cleansing of heart purification and heart medicine, the cleansing and the purifying that enters into the body is saying this must come into physical manifestation, but you have a choice according to how you are going to action it, action this thought and this feeling into physical manifestation. So I hope that answered the question as well, because here when we look at that hierarchy, and it's not higher as in better than, because they're all necessary. You can't have the trunk without the seed, and you can't have the seed without the soil together being able to manifest this thing. We also look at politics, okay, because politics is a governance of the land. Governance of the land. It is putting things into order. So when we look at divine feminine, we look at Queen energy, we look at Empress energy. Everything is about sovereignty. It's about respect and putting order. It's knowing that this is your role and your duty. And in order to, if you're an Empress, you know your work is to be the trunk. Then you're not going to now be jealous over the branches that are holding the leaves and the beauty. Because remember, Empress ruled over a multitude of kingdoms. So already you just stand in your power. All you need to do is be. A lot of this work is being energy. Can you be and cleanse and purify from just that being state without needing to always validate through physical manifestation and doing and action? Your action comes through a meditative and present state of mind. Okay? So we think of that Empress. Empress knows I'm the trunk. I'm steady. I'm here. I am not in competition with anybody because this is what I'm holding. So much steadiness. So you think tree pose if you're someone who does yoga. And then we go to Queen, which now begins to express this beauty of this nourishment that is coming through the divinity, through the Empress energy, through Queen energy, into what blooms and gives nourishment. But every part of these expressions are divine. So once again, it comes from source, it comes from God, it comes from universe. So I hope that answered your question, and I hope that also allowed you to think in different ways that maybe you didn't expect this answer to come about. Neither did I. So that's why it's fun to just learn in this manner. And then we do more research and we find out what energy is calling for us and what season are we in. Once again, if you'd like a one-on-one consultation, please do email me down below and we can help you out with certain questions. Remember, if you need a little bit more of a sort of a cleansing, ceremonial, just observation in this. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, sending so much love and have a beautiful time just in that ideation phase from what comes from this.